Hello, my name is Hallie, and welcome to this opportunity to identify the parts of the forebrain. In this review, we will begin with a general overview of the forebrain, and then we will identify the key function of each structure that arises from the diencephalon and the telencephalon. And by the end of this review, you'll have a better ability to identify the major functions associated with each anatomical region of the forebrain. And you'll be able to evaluate questions, such as the one at the bottom of the screen, which asks you to pair a region of the forebrain with its function. This is an overview of our embryonic brain, and for the purposes of this review, we'll only focus on the forebrain. And we see that as the forebrain develops, it divides into two regions, the diencephalon and the telencephalon. The telencephalon is the most sophisticated part of our forebrain, and it is responsible for many of the characteristics that are unique to human beings, such as intellect and emotional capabilities. Regions of the diencephalon play important roles in memory formation as well as endocrine function. Let's begin by analyzing the parts of the forebrain that arise from the diencephalon, beginning with the thalamus. The thalamus has a very important role in helping us to interpret our sensory information, and it does this by behaving as a relay station. It will receive sensory stimuli from all of our senses except for our sense of smell. This is because our sense of smell has its own devoted pathway to the higher regions of the brain that don't require processing through the thalamus, and it's more complicated than what we'll need to know for the MCAT. The thalamus will then sort all of that sensory information, with the exception of smell, and then decide which part of the cerebral cortex that information needs to be transmitted to. And for this reason, the thalamus is often referred to as the way station, as it decides where that stimuli will need to be relayed to in order to be deciphered. Moving forward, we're going to now assess the hypothalamus, which is another part of our forebrain that arises from the diencephalon. And the hypothalamus has some pretty important functions, one being the regulation of homeostasis, specifically our metabolism, temperature, and water balance. And it also participates in our emotional experience as we respond to high arousal states, such as aggressive or sexual behavior. The hypothalamus also has some endocrine function, which in part regulates the autonomic system. And do know that for test day, we do have a mnemonic to help you remember the purpose of the hypothalamus, which is that it's responsible for the 4 F's of our functioning. There's feeding, fighting, flighting, and sexual functioning. The hypothalamus is located just below our thalamus, which makes sense. Hypo means less than or below, and the hypothalamus is connected to our pituitary. The hypothalamus is divided into 3 regions. The lateral hypothalamus triggers our eating and drinking. So this is the part of our brain that recognizes that our caloric or water balance is not quite right, and we need to correct that by taking in nutrients. The middle part of our hypothalamus is also known as the ventromedial hypothalamus, and this is our satiating center. So this is the part of our brain that recognizes we have enough food, we're full, we don't need to eat anymore, and helps us to not feel hungry anymore. The forward part of the hypothalamus, or the anterior, is the part of our brain that controls sexual behavior. There are 2 more regions of the forebrain that arise from the diencephalon that we'll want to know for test day. The first is the posterior pituitary. Now, don't get confused on test day. Only the posterior portion of the pituitary arises from the diencephalon. The anterior part of the pituitary actually arises from the oral ectoderm. However, for the purposes of learning the parts of the forebrain, we're going to focus on the posterior pituitary, and remember that the pituitary lies just below the hypothalamus and is able to secrete hypothalamic hormones in response to stimulation from the hypothalamus. For example, antidiuretic hormone, which is ADH, and oxytocin. The final region of the diencephalon is the pineal gland, which plays an important role in regulating our circadian rhythms, and the most well-known function of the pineal gland is the secretion of melatonin, which regulates our sleep cycle. For the rest of this review, we will focus on the structures of the forebrain that arise from the telencephalon, beginning with the basal ganglia, which lies in the middle of our brain and is essential for coordinating our muscle movement. And it does this by relaying information from the cerebral cortex to our central nervous system. Then the stimulus can be relayed to the peripheral nervous system, where it can coordinate smooth muscle movement as well as maintain proper posture. However, malfunctions in the basal ganglia have been shown to be an underlying cause of Parkinson's disease, and many of us have probably seen a Parkinson's patient before and know that they are characterized by having uncontrollable jerky movements as well as resting tremors. Malfunctions in the basal ganglia may also play a role in schizophrenia and obsessive compulsive disorder. Moving on to the limbic system. This is a group of interconnected structures that surround the central portion of the brain and are primarily associated with emotions and memory. Starting with the hippocampus, which has been shown to be pretty important for memory, and scientists discovered the role of this part of the brain when it was removed from a seizure patient. And unfortunately for that patient, he then became an amnesia patient because he was no longer able to create new memories. But the good news is we now know that the hippocampus is quite important for us to create memories, and nice mnemonic for test day is that hippos are like elephants and elephants never forget. Another structure in the limbic system is the amygdala, and the amygdala has been shown to play an important role in our ability to either react aggressively or defensively. And damage to this part of the brain shows a decreased ability to react fearfully or aggressively to a stimuli. The cerebral cortex also arose from the telencephalon, and it is the most highly evolved part of our brain and is associated with most of the characteristics that make us uniquely human. The cerebral cortex is divided into two halves called the cerebral hemispheres, and then each hemisphere is further divided into 4 lobes. Let's begin with the frontal lobe, which is responsible for our executive functioning. It regulates the behavior or processing of other regions of our brain, such as our ability to perceive stimuli, process memory, emotions, impulse control, and long-term planning. So a great example is if you're in a situation and you're stimulated by your environment to either be angry, fearful, to react in some way. The emotional part of your brain will just stimulate you to react. The frontal lobe of your brain is the one that tries to control your behavior so that you don't fly off the handle. People who have damage in the frontal lobe of the brain appear to be either impulsive or that they don't quite have control over their behavior. The parietal lobe is responsible for helping us to process our spatial orientation. Some of this applies to reading maps and understanding how objects will lie in three-dimensional space, but more importantly, the parietal lobe helps us understand where our body parts, such as our arms and legs, are oriented in relation to the rest of our body. The occipital lobe is our visual cortex, and it is able to process all of our visual information, and it is one of the most well understood lobes of the brain. Then the temporal lobe is responsible for our ability to process auditory information, both language and music. Temporal lobe has also been shown to have some function in memory processing, and that's because the hippocampus lies deep within the temporal lobe. Before moving on, let's assess 2 cortices that lie within the lobes of the cerebral cortex. The first being the somatosensory cortex, which is located in the parietal lobe, and the motor cortex, which is located in the frontal lobe. Now, it's no accident that these 2 cortices lie so closely together. The somatosensory cortex receives sensory stimuli that was collected by our peripheral nervous system and then processes how we want to respond to those sensory sensations, such as touch, pressure, temperature, and pain. Then the motor cortex will initiate voluntary muscle movement in response to that sensory stimuli by sending signals down our spinal cord and then stimulating specific parts of the peripheral nervous system. The way neurons are organized on these cortices is also quite interesting. For example, let's look at the motor cortex. We see that the neurons are arranged by body region, and we also see that some body regions are larger than they would actually be in the human body, or they seem distorted. Specifically the hands and the facial muscles. And this is because we have a huge amount of fine motor control in these regions and require more motor neurons to accomplish these tasks, especially when you compare it to something like the toes, where we don't have a lot of fine motor control over our toes that kind of do what they want to do. The somatosensory cortex is designed in the same way conceptually, but the body regions that are accentuated are relative to the amount of sensory stimuli that they can pick up. For example, our tongues and index fingers would look large on the somatosensory cortex. So now that we have identified that the cerebral cortex is very important in our ability to process our cognitive and behavioral processes, do note that each hemisphere of the cerebral cortex does have some unique functions. Without the corpus callosum, the 2 hemispheres of the brain wouldn't be able to communicate or coordinate with each other. And the purpose of the corpus callosum was discovered when, back in the old days, they severed this part of the brain in a last-ditch effort to protect epileptic patients from having seizures. And they found that these patients patients were unable to touch an object with one hand and then coordinate that information with the language processing of their brain because the two hemispheres of their brain were no longer able to communicate. Well, we can finally analyze the laterality of our brain. The large majority of people are left brain dominant, and we define hemisphere dominance as the side of the brain that is the most stimulated in response to language reception and production. And the left side of the brain tends to be more scientific in nature, tends to be analytical, while the right side of the brain tends to be more artistic and superior at intuition. An interesting note about laterality is that the left side of the brain controls left side hearing. This is considered ipsilateral control, ipsi meaning same side, and likewise the right side of the brain controls right side hearing. However, the left side of the brain controls right side movement. Since this is opposite, we would consider this contralateral control. Contralateral meaning opposite or other. And the right side of the brain will control left side movement. Now, regardless of which side of the brain is dominant, whether left or right, hearing will always be under ipsilateral control and movement will be contralateral. Now that we've completed this review, we can attack questions which ask us to identify the correct pairing between anatomical region and function, such as this question. And the correct pairing is hippocampus and memory formation. Remember the mnemonic that hippos are like elephants and elephants never forget. We can also use the information from this review to help us predict which regions of the brain may have been damaged when presented with a specific set of symptoms, such as this question. And the correct answer is the parietal lobe. If we have a patient who has a difficult time understanding where their body parts are oriented around the surrounding space, we would expect that their spatial recognition has been damaged, which is associated with the parietal lobe. Well, there was certainly a lot of information from this review that we'll want to remember, but to highlight the big takeaways is that the thalamus is the way station that relays sensory information to the appropriate parts of the brain. The hypothalamus maintains our balance of homeostatic functions, and then the rest of the diencephalon is important in our ability to release hypothalamic endocrines, as well as regulating circadian rhythms. Then the portions of the forebrain that arise from the telencephalon are the basal ganglia, which help us to have smooth, coordinated muscle movement and maintain good posture. The limbic system has an important role in our ability to form memories and emotions, and then the cerebral cortex is responsible for many of the characteristics that are unique to human beings. Well, congratulations on completing this review. There is certainly a lot of information presented here that you'll want to remember for the behavioral sciences portion of your MCAT. And hopefully your corpus callosum is doing you some favors in allowing the right and left hemispheres of your brain to coordinate and process some of this information into memory. Thank you for joining me, and as always, best of luck on your exam.